Well, our last session looking at feedback is with Conor McQuaid. Conor, welcome to the Student Hub Live. And you've joined us before where you've been talking about your postgraduate work, and you boiled an egg for us, didn't you?
Worked spectacularly well.
It was fantastic, and you can watch that on Catch Up as well. But you're doing some really, really interesting work, and I'm so glad you've come along, because I wanted to talk about this whole point of feedback, which isn't just about tutor marked assignments. It's about being an academic and about learning, and you're sort of in a really interesting stage of your career where you've been doing an undergraduate degree, now you're doing, PhD, and you're getting lots and lots of different kinds of feedback as well. So I wanted to talk about this from a range of perspectives, about how you've sort of dealt with feedback, any ideas you've got for students, thinking about conference presentations, writing papers, and all of these things, which feedback is just such an important part. And we've got some widgets which we'd like to know your thoughts on. So do you often get the same feedback repeated? So maybe some of those of you who are writing about being confused about things are seeing things popping up over and again, but aren't maybe understanding what the point is of that. We've got a word cloud as well. I see feedback as. So what do you see feedback as? That could be anything. There's 3 options in there. If you don't put all 3 things in, it won't submit. So if you can only think of 1 or 2, just put a full stop in the box, and then at least that will populate the word cloud. How often do you reflect on your feedback? So we've asked you beforehand how many times you're picking up your TMA, and a lot of you said a lot more than 3, which was great. But we just want to check in as well, because people do come and go from these sessions. So whether you never look at it to you look at it all the time, I think that might be a little bit inclusive, but it's a scale, so maybe towards the top end. And have you ever tried to mark your own work? So like John was talking about the importance of being a reflective learner, have you ever tried that? We'd like to know. Okay, so Conor, what's it like being a PhD student, and what sort of feedback are you dealing with now that's maybe different from undergraduate study?
Yeah, so it's a lot more specific to what I'm doing day to day. So I have weekly meetings with my supervisor, my primary supervisor, and we do checklists, which are really useful to help just, plan out what you're going to do. And also I have every 3 months meetings with the drugs company who support me. So they've got a very different kind of goal orientation. They want me to have lots of results and lots of things. So it's a different kind of workload, but it all works together.
So you've got very different motivations coming into play, and I guess different feedback as a result of that.
Yes, so my supervisor would be more about the kind of simple problem solvings and what I would expect to do next if I got this result, or what the kind of literature would recommend, while the company is more concerned about actually getting the results, so we've got some solid feedback to build on with. And again, it does work hand in hand, but one is more following kind of academia and following what's interesting, and one's more about goal orientation.
Yeah. Now, how do you deal with the side of things, getting these different sorts of feedback? Because you're working on a lot of complex things. So you might be working on your literature, you might be you're doing your primary research, etc., feeding back on results, doing analyses. You're doing a lot of different things, so there'll be a lot of different forms of feedback coming through. How do you react to some of that, though? Is there still that sense that this is your baby and your work, and therefore anything negative is going to hurt a bit?
It's a big step to realise that all the criticism that you're getting is constructive,
yeah.
And or very rarely it's anything other than that, and that they're all just trying to hope for you to improve. So yes, and it's something like writing, when you kind of do maybe a month or 2 of quite heavy writing and then not do it for 6 months, learn that it's never perfect. You're always going to have to keep learning, and my supervisors are still learning every day, so this learning experience keeps continuing.
It's such an important point, isn't it? Because I often think students think, oh, well, I'll get to the end of my degree and then I'll know how to write an essay and I'll be perfect at it. And like you say, if you're not practicing skills, you can get really out of sync with them very, very quickly. And everybody is learning something new. Everyone's got their own battles and their own feedback. But this idea about, it being sort of a step where you realise that the feedback is constructive. Can you tell us about that? Was there a moment, or did it develop? How did you get that sense that actually I've been getting feedback all the time, but now this is actually here to help me? These people aren't criticising. It's not that I need to improve. It's a way of developing as opposed to being bad.
Well, I think I always kind of felt, even through primary school and stuff, that English was never a strong point, writing skills and things. But the more I've gone along with it, the more I've developed, there's more of a system. and it's very simple set of goals. And so just the more by doing it, the more you appreciate what it is, the skills that you're learning. And yeah, I just feel that you're always going to be progressing and moving forward. And although it might feel sometimes that you're just not built to do these things, you actually are. It's just learning the process to do it.
A lot of feedback I tend to get if I've submitted something is a different perspective. So it might be that I'm writing about X, Y or Z, and then someone will say, well, actually, have you considered this? Or this presents a different view on things, or this, that and the other. So sometimes there's quite a real dialogue going on in terms of different ideas that maybe people are bringing to the table. And from undergraduate students as well, they might be having that dialogue with their tutor in terms of their, the feedback that they're getting on their script comments. How do you then deal with things that are yours, like you haven't written this very well, or you could develop X, Y, or Z, or blah, 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 blah. So things that are skills related and things that are feeding back around ideas or different viewpoints. Do you separate the two out and think then, okay, well, like John Quill said, I could chuck that in my action plan and I could work on this. Or actually, I don't really think that's a good idea. So it's something entirely different. You're talking about something else and it doesn't really relate to what I'm doing, so I'm going to dismiss it. Different stages of feedback, aren't there?
Yeah, so it's very much... I feel like it's my own work a lot of the time when I'm doing it, and so I'll always have my point of opinion. But it's very important to appreciate that your supervisor, again, is giving another area of perspective, and that's really important. But it's normally quite clear if it's, your sentence structure isn't correct here, the phrasing isn't correct here, to have you considered this opinion, have you considered this side of the argument. You can always just have a small comment about that side if you really want to force through one idea and say your idea is better than the other. But yeah, so they normally can keep it quite well structured in what way to move forward.
And are there times sometimes where you have a break from something? We've been talking about getting space from things, where you might think, no, I'm not talking about that right now. For example, if it's an idea, and then maybe later you think, actually, maybe they had a point, or I didn't really fully appreciate where they were coming from, and actually it could be relevant. Do you park those things? Do you have a journal that you use, like Jonka was talking about, where you maybe put things and then dismiss them for now, but come back to them as important later?
Yeah, luckily we have a lab book where we write down all the practical things that we do, but I also put my notes in from my weekly meetings and further meetings as well. This gives a chance that although I might not completely agree with someone's opinion at that time, I can always have it written down and solid and somewhere to track back to. And it does happen quite regularly that you've not seen it maybe from just a different perspective, and at the time you're kind of defending your baby, so to speak, but you realise later on there was a very valid point.
I want to ask you about whether you keep getting the same feedback ever, because we asked our audience how often they get the same feedback, and 54% of them say that they get the same feedback repeated. Now, we know that learning often doesn't happen immediately, and often you need to do things lots of times to learn from them. It's not just, don't do that. Oh, OK, then I won't do it. So learning, having the same feedback is quite common, isn't it?
Yeah.
How's that been in your situation?
It's been interesting. I mean, my main thing that I would get repeatedly, although it's decreased as I've got older and doing it, is time management. So I find it difficult to fully plan and understand how long something will take. But again, that's just practice and writing to-do lists and planning what you're going to do for the week, and then seeing, okay, that took twice as long, therefore I know what to do from it. So although I've always had that from primary school probably upwards, it's definitely improved.
Yeah. We asked our audience as well how often they reflect on their feedback, and it's over halfway, so a lot of them are looking at it a lot of the time in terms of reflecting on feedback. And we've also asked them about marking their own work. The majority of them haven't. 64% say that they have never tried marking their own work. Tell us how that's been for you when maybe you're reviewing things or you've got to almost self-check what you're submitting. How do you mark your own work and be your own reflective guide throughout your own process? Do you need to do that?
Definitely. Before you want to send something away to be published or to put it out in the public sphere, it has to be correct English, it has to make sense, you have to check the science in it. I think the biggest thing for writing is to read it out loud as you go through it, and to actually see what it sounds like. And then a gap period, so you write it, the deadline's 2 weeks in advance, you have a couple of days of a gap, and then you go back to it. So you're reading it as if you've first come to it, and it really helps you evaluate what someone else who's seeing it for the first time, kind of how it expresses to them.
Now, that's good if you're very conscientious and you've managed your time well, but what if you don't? What if life's getting in the way? And, you know, are there any sort of quick-fire techniques you've got that you could recommend to people about checking maybe what's in a paragraph or whether a point's actually making sense?
So again, reading out loud helps a lot, but also I've got some really good friends and sisters and people like that there who are really helpful. So I fire off an email to them. Can you have a quick read through this? Does this make sense? You know, some of them aren't in science or anything like that, so it helps a lot if it just the simple English makes sense to them. So yeah, I rely a lot on friends and colleagues and stuff to help.
I'm glad you've mentioned this because I think it's a really important point. So many people say, well, I don't understand anything about this, how can I read it? And actually sometimes it's more useful if someone doesn't get what you're saying, because they'll at least get whether a paragraph has a point to it or something's completely muddled. And you know, if we're trying to sort of explain something, it should make sense, even if it is to an educated or informed or specific scientific community. You know, they might not get the level of explanation, but there should be an aspect that people are able to feedback on.
Yeah, there's always a problem with terminology, and especially in science, they like to use big long words to explain things just because that's a quicker way to do it. But a good point of, especially if you're writing grants, you have to write to a layperson who doesn't know anything about this. So being able to explain that to the everyday person is a big step in it.
So thinking now about feedback changing, you know, often for undergraduate students at level 1, they'll get a lot of feedback, a lot of hand-holding, a lot of guidance in the TMA notes. What does your feedback look like now? I mean, you've mentioned the various sorts of different sides of feedback, but how would you say it's different in terms of what you're getting? Is it harder to understand maybe some of the points that are raised? Are they more complex?
They are more complex, but it's developed as you've developed, so it's more specific to a specific area that you're doing, but it still should make sense. I mean, something that I've always learned quite quickly, the best piece of advice was just to say, if you don't understand, you don't understand. If you don't know the answer, just say, no, I don't understand, because it makes such a big difference for people. We often try to pretend that we know all the answers and keep waffling on. The simple thing is to say, I don't know, and to sit down with the supervisor and to actually go through with it, and that's always helped me a lot.
Yeah, so recognising where those parameters are. And I guess that might be quite useful if you were thinking about, you know, what you might write about, sticking with things that are addressing the point of the question or what you're supposed to be doing, because it is very easy, isn't it, to veer off on different terrains. I bet you find that. Yeah,
you just want to follow whatever's interesting, and you keep going and following that trail, and you need to keep a structure. You need to go back to actually the logical steps that you're going through.
Excellent. OK, let me just take a quick trip to the hot desk and see what HJ and Yvonne are talking about.
Yes, well, we had a little chat earlier about marking your own assignments, and I think Stuart said he'd do really well if he marked his own assignments, but I don't think we mean it that way. But,
yeah, you're not allowed to. Mind you, that's not setting the question very clearly.
But Katie and I would just having a chat about actually how you use the marking criteria to sort of as a guide and to point you about what you might need to include, because it gives some guidance as how tutors mark in regards to structure and making sure all the references is in there, so it can be a good reminder of what you need in an assignment.
Like the fish.
Like the fish, yes. But we talked about criticising, whether tutors criticise as well. And I have brought this up on another event, but I always like to talk about it, that tutors, they never look to mark you down. They always mark you up. So they make sure, have they looked at stuff from the module materials? Yes, so that's a bunch of marks. And they always build you up, and they never look to bring you down. And if you do feel that way, maybe just like talk to your tutor, or if you're not sure about the marks. But I also said before about when you do get marks, it's a bit like salami slices. So the big things like getting referencing right and using module materials will get you big chunks, and then the higher you get, it sort of goes up to more little slices. So it's not that you're not doing as well by not jumping marks, but when you get sort of to certain points, just those minor improvements are actually really big, and they're a very good thing.
So we're going for the whole salami button slices.
Whole salami button.
It has to go back to food. Always food. Always food, Conor. It's ridiculous. Okay, now tell me about some of the other ways that we get academic feedback. So other than your PhD, you're going to conferences, presentations and things as well, either as a participant or maybe giving talks. It's very, very offensive when people don't ask any questions though at the end. So feedback is a really important thing, and often we'll get questions saying I didn't understand this or this, or it might be someone's reflecting on a different point, or they might want to add something to that. So how do you then deal with this whole idea of feedback and these other different academic terrains? Maybe you're going to a conference and are too nervous to ask a question, but it is such an important part of being an academic.
Yeah, I think in general a lot of scientists and people in science are quite nervous and shy people generally. A big step in that is we do student conferences quite often, and so we'll actually be the own chairs. So then we'll know that if someone's been done a presentation and there's not questions, we put forward questions to kind of get that ball rolling and start the initiative. We try a lot to have students asking questions of other students rather than just at these kind of small events, just supervisors asking questions. And then it moves on to papers and publications and things like that, where it's a lot more formal, so it's a lot more structured. It can be a little bit more soul-destroying because they're actually going, right, you need to go back in the lab and do 6 more months more of work when you thought you had something done. But it's a lot more bullet-pointed and simple to follow.
So how do you then deal with some of that feedback?
Sometimes you need to go to the pub and have a quick drink to just calm. But it's just try and keep it as all little points as possible and just use them as to-do lists. So you find that your sentence structure wasn't right, so find a way to do it properly, read Essence of Style or some kind of textbook to help with that there, and move on with that. And as long as you've got a good supervisor, which thankfully I do, they'll be able to feed back on those little things.
And what's been the most difficult thing for you to change? We were talking about how people can get the same feedback over and over again. What's been hardest for you?
Time management, as I said before, has been an issue. And with a PhD, you don't need to be in 9 to 5 technically. Quite often you're meant to do longer hours. But if you decide to sleep in and stay until noon someday, there's no one quite shouting at you. It's more about getting the work done. So I find that difficult. You're completely self-regulating yourself, and I can understand a lot of people who are studying at home who maybe have a part-time job or full-time job and having to come back and self-regulate themselves to do work instead of having a cup of tea and watching TV. That's hard, but to-do lists and checklists and stuff really help that, and just by seeing a little bit of progress every day.
And do you value the feedback that you get? Does it actually help you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I use it all the time as criteria of where to improve, and I think it's a big thing to know you're never going to get perfect, but you want to keep going. You want to keep trying to get as high up and as close to that perfection as you can.
And has anyone ever given you any gems of inspiration or feedback that you thought, yeah, that's definitely it?
Well, I think the big one was told that if you don't understand, just a minute. I was in the meeting my interview for the PhD, and I just didn't know something, and I tried to explain it. I made sure I understood the question, and I just had to admit I didn't know. And they were quite thankful that I did that. They were quite happy that that's the way I handled the question, and that actually helped me get my PhD. Yeah,
really, really good. And sometimes you shouldn't know. Sometimes it's just not in your domain, is it? And so by trying to answer something, it shows that you maybe don't recognise what is or isn't appropriate to be doing at that moment in time.
Yeah, it's a better sign of your understanding of things if you can just go, no, I don't understand, rather than pretend you understand. So yeah, definitely.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Conor. That's been really, really useful. And I think, if nothing else, so interesting, because so many people don't know that there are PhD students at the Open University doing lots of science. And just tell us briefly, to end, what your PhD is about.
So my PhD is looking with Alzheimer's and all those kind of neurodegenerative disorders. And there's a huge issue with getting drugs into the brain. 95% of everything that's been created to treat brain disorders don't get in there. So I'm working with a company and with the OU to hopefully create a drug delivery system that we can hopefully treat these disorders. So Alzheimer's is personally specific to me, but hopefully Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, and a whole host of things.
Brilliant. Oh, well, good luck with that, Conor. And thank you so much for coming along.
Cheers.
That's
Thank you
been
very
brilliant.
much.
Thank you. Well, that's the last of our guests for the session, and we're nearly out of time. But HJ and Yvonne, you've been drawing on the board and doing lots of interesting things. Did you want to give us a little plenary?
Trying to draw.
Yes.
It's all that pie you've been eating.
So yeah, I've drawn a pie, or tried to anyway.
Yeah.
And there's 8 out of 8 slices there, which are all gone. And I thought I might just write salami instead of trying to draw it.
Yeah.
But we also know, because we talked about proportions, about how to show in numbers the whole, didn't we, as proportions. So we're going for the whole salami.
The whole
That's our
salami,
point.
yes,
the whole
absolutely.
salami.
Absolutely.
That's the point. But I also liked our bits with the fish and actually finding out what the TMA is about and making sure you read it properly and, yes, use the assignment.
Is that a numerical representation of pi there, I see?
Yeah, we were told to draw pie, but we weren't sure what pie.
Ah, right.
But it's just making me more hungry as well. They pointed out that they think I get distracted by food very easily, and they
Well,
are
you
right.
do.
Well, I can't help it.
Excellent. Well, you two have both been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting to everyone today on the hot desk and for sharing information and advice. We're going to end the live sessions now, but the chat is going to stay open for another half an hour so that you can talk about anything that's of interest to you. And if you haven't been able to engage with the content today, it's going to be available on the catch-up, as is lots of other stuff we've been doing. So there are loads of other sessions there. If you're new to the Open University, we've got all sorts of things like navigating the virtual learning environment, things from your tutor, getting advice on how to progress, dealing with feedback, looking at assessments. So there's a lot of content on the Student Hub Live website that you can go and check out if you like our programmes that we're delivering. But I'd just like to find out how you've enjoyed the show today. So we've got a couple of widgets there, which are if you've enjoyed it, have you learnt anything, and also what's been most useful. But it's also really interesting for us to know how you found it. So if you can put some comments in the chat, we'd be really, really grateful. And there's also a small feedback button on the website. Well, sorry, it's not a small feedback button. Actually, it's quite small. The feedback button will link you to a small feedback form even, which is very quick and easy to fill out. So that'll tell us what you've enjoyed, and maybe if you've got some ideas about things that we haven't covered, you could let us know. You can also email us, which is studenthub@open.ac.uk. So again, any suggestions about things you might like to see. But I'd like to thank my guests from this afternoon, who've been Peter Taylor, Klaus-Dieter Assar, John Quillow and Conor McQuaid, who've given us a really good summary of how to deal with assessment, TMA feedback and feeding that forward and what it's like to have feedback as part of your academic career. We've got resources on the website, and you can also give us your email address using the Count Me In button, and we'll then tell you when our next event is on. But I'll tell you now since you're here. It's on the 31st of January and the 1st of February, where we've got our Introduction to the Open University, which is a 2-day event in both the daytime and the evening. We're going to have lots of debates, lots of discussions, and take a look at many areas of Open University life. So I do hope you can join us then. We're going to lead out with a couple of short videos that you might enjoy, and as I say, the chat will stay open for another half an hour. I'm Karen Foley. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing so much of your experiences with each other in the chat. I'll see you very soon, but bye for now.